The lobby had gone completely silent. Every being in that vast space held their breath as they watched the small human girl walk toward the impossible visitor. The diplomats had stopped arguing. The scientists had stopped scanning, and even Manager Velrix had frozen with all four of his arms hanging loose at his sides. Myra felt her heart pounding in her chest, but she did not let her fear show on her face. She had learned long ago that aliens could sense fear in ways that humans could not understand, and she did not want this visitor to think she was afraid of them, because she was not afraid, not really. She was nervous, and she was uncertain. But underneath all of that, she felt something much stronger than fear. She felt a deep and powerful need to help this lost and lonely being that no one else could understand. She stopped about 10 feet away from the visitor and simply stood there. Her hands relaxed at her sides and her dark eyes looking directly at the swirling colors and shifting shapes. She did not speak because she knew that words would be useless. She did not reach out because she did not want to startle the being. She simply stood there and waited and watched and listened with every part of herself. The being seemed to study her in return, and Mira noticed that its colors were changing. The dark and angry shades were fading, replaced by softer tones that reminded her of the sky at sunset. The jagged geometric shapes were smoothing out, becoming rounder and gentler. It was calming. Down, Myra felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, and she let it show. The being responded immediately, its colors brightening as if her smile had been a gift. And then Myra did something that surprised everyone in the lobby, including herself. She began to hum. It was a simple melody, a song that her grandmother had sung to her when she was a little girl. It had no words that mattered, just rising and falling notes that had always made her feel safe and loved. She did not know why she chose this song, but something deep inside her said that it was right. The being listened, and its form began to pulse gently in rhythm with her. Humming, the colors shifted in waves that matched the rise and fall of her melody. It was joining her song. Myra felt tears spring to her eyes at this beautiful and impossible moment of connection. When the song ended, she raised her hands and drew a shape in the air, a simple circle. The being watched her, and then it created a circle of its own within its shifting form. Myra drew a triangle, and the being made a triangle. She drew a star, and the being made a star that glowed with inner light. This was it. She realized this was how they could talk. Over the next hour, Mira and the visitor developed a language that had never existed before. It was a language of shapes and colors and rhythms, of gestures and movements and shared feelings. It was clumsy and slow and often confusing, but it was real communication, and that was more than any of the experts had achieved. The scientists watched in stunned amazement as this teenage girl did what their billion-credit translators could not do. The diplomats whispered to each other in shocked tones, unable to believe what they were seeing. And Manager Velrix felt a hope rising in his chest that he had not felt since the chaos began. Myra learned the visitor had a name, or at least something like a name. The closest she could translate it was Wandering Silence, and it was a name that made her heart ache with sympathy. She learned that Wandering Silence came from somewhere very far away, not just in distance, but in the very nature of reality. It came from a place where beings did not communicate with sounds or symbols, but through direct sharing of experience and emotion. In that place, loneliness did not exist, because every being was connected to every other being in ways that Mira could barely imagine. But Wandering Silence had been pulled away from that connection, thrown through a crack in the fabric of existence, and dropped into this cold and silent universe where no one could feel what it felt. Mira sat on the floor of the lobby, her legs crossed and her eyes filled with tears as she finally understood why the visitor had seemed so agitated and afraid. It was not dangerous. It was terrified and alone. She reached out her hand, not to touch the being, but simply to offer comfort, and Wandering Silence extended a tendril of light toward her. They did not touch, but something passed between them anyway, a warmth and a kindness that needed no words. The head linguist of the Morvathi delegation, a being with 6 eyes and a brain that could process 12 languages at once, approached Mira with obvious hesitation. "How is this possible?" the linguist asked in a voice filled with wonder. "We have spent millennia perfecting the art of communication, and yet you did in 1 hour what we could not do at all. How did you know what to do?" Mira looked up at the tall alien and shrugged her small shoulders. "I did not try to make them speak my language," she said in her simple and quiet way. "I tried to feel what they felt. I watched and I listened and I let myself be open to whatever they were trying to share. That is all." The linguist made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "That is all," the linguist repeated. "Child, do you not understand what you have done? You have achieved true first contact with a being from another dimension. You have created a new language from nothing, and you say that is all." Myra did not understand why this seemed so amazing to the aliens around her. To her, it had simply felt like the right thing to do. When someone was hurting and afraid, you tried to help them. When someone was trying to speak, you tried to listen. Was that not what anyone would do? But as she looked around at the faces of the beings in the lobby, she began to realize that perhaps it was not what anyone would do. Perhaps there was something different about the way humans thought and felt. Perhaps there was something special about her that she had never recognized before. Wandering Silence pulsed with gentle colors, and Mira understood that the being was trying to tell her something important. She focused her attention and watched the patterns carefully, drawing shapes with her hands to confirm her understanding. What she learned made her blood run cold. Wandering Silence had not come to this universe by accident. There was a crack in the barrier between dimensions, a rift that was growing larger with every passing moment. And if it was not closed soon, it would swallow everything in this sector of space. Millions of beings would die, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. No one in this universe had the knowledge to close the rift. Only beings like Wandering Silence understood how to heal such a wound in reality. But Wandering Silence could not explain to anyone how to help. It had tried, and no one could understand. The knowledge was too different, too strange, too far outside the way beings in this universe thought. Mira felt the weight of this revelation pressing down on her shoulders like a mountain. "Can you teach me?" she asked, with her hands in her colors and her desperately hopeful heart. "Can you show me what needs to be done? And I will try to explain it to the others." Wandering Silence went very still, and for a long moment, Mira was afraid that she had asked for something impossible. But then the being began to glow with colors she had never seen before, colors that seemed to reach directly into her mind and plant images and ideas that she could barely begin to understand. The lesson had begun. The Celestin way station floated in the darkness of space like a jewel made of glass and light, and it was the most famous hotel in all the known galaxy. Every species that traveled between the stars knew about this place, and every species dreamed of staying here at least once in their lifetime. The wealthy came here to rest, the diplomats came here to negotiate, and the curious came here simply to watch the endless parade of alien life that moved through its grand halls every single day. Manager Velric Thune stood in the center of the main lobby with all 4 of his arms folded behind his back, and his large golden eyes swept across the busy space with the calm confidence of someone who had seen everything the universe had to offer. He was a Cassari, a species known for their patience and their skill in the art of hospitality, and he had managed this station for over 200 years without a single major incident. The lobby itself was a marvel of engineering that stretched upward for nearly 50 floors. with balconies and walkways connecting different sections where gravity worked in different directions. Beings that breathed oxygen walked on one level, while beings that breathed methane floated on another. And beings that existed as pure energy drifted through specially designed corridors that kept them comfortable and contained. Valrix had served guests with 10 legs and guests with no legs at all. He had accommodated beings made of living stone and beings made of singing crystal. He had welcomed visitors from the hot cores of gas giants and visitors from the frozen moons at the edge of known space. There was no species in the Galactic Registry that his staff could not handle, no language that his universal translators could not decode, no custom that his cultural database could not explain. This was his pride, and this was his promise to every guest who walked through those shimmering arrival gates. But on this particular night, something would happen that would shake that pride to its very foundation, and it all began with a flash of impossible light. The arrival gate sparked and crackled with energy that the sensors had never recorded before, and alarms began to ring throughout the station as the security systems tried to identify what was coming through. Valrix rushed toward the gate with his staff close behind him, his forearms already reaching for his communication devices and his translator and his emergency protocols all at once. What came through the gate was not like anything in the Galactic Registry. It was not solid, and it was not liquid, and it was not gas. It was not energy in any form that the scientists could name. It existed as shifting shapes that hurt the eyes to look at, geometries that seemed to fold in on themselves and unfold again in patterns that made no logical sense. Colors that had no names rippled across its surface, and sounds that were not really sounds vibrated through the air around it. The universal translators in the lobby all sparked and smoked and died, one after another, as they tried to process something they were never designed to understand. Valrix felt his heart beating fast in his chest as he watched his guests scatter in fear, their screams and clicks and whistles filling the air as they fled from the impossible thing that had invaded their peaceful sanctuary. His staff looked to him for guidance, but for the first time in 200 years, he had no idea what to do. The being drifted further into the lobby, and everywhere it went, the lights flickered and the gravity wavered, and the very fabric of normal space seemed to bend and stretch, like fabric pulled too tight. Within minutes, the diplomats arrived. Within an hour, the linguists came. By the second hour, experts from 12 different species had gathered in the lobby, each one bringing their most advanced equipment and their most brilliant theories about how to communicate with this visitor. The Marvathi tried telepathy and found only screaming static in their minds. The Zelkari tried mathematical patterns and received responses that contradicted the basic laws of mathematics. The crystalline chorus tried harmonic resonance and nearly shattered themselves when the being responded with frequencies that should not have been able to exist. Nothing worked, and with each failed attempt, the being grew more agitated. Its colors shifted toward darker shades. Its impossible geometry became sharper and more jagged, and the distortions it created in the space around it grew stronger and more dangerous. Valrix watched in horror as cracks began to appear in the walls of his beautiful lobby, and he knew that, if they could not find a way to calm this visitor soon, the entire station might be torn apart. And through all of this chaos and fear and desperate scrambling, there was one person who did not run away. Her name was Mira Chun, and she was 17 years old. She was the daughter of Samuel Chun, the human maintenance engineer who kept the station's systems running, and she had lived on this station her entire life. She had no special training in alien languages, and she had no advanced degrees in xenobiology. She was just a girl who had grown up watching strange and wonderful beings come and go through her home. While everyone else saw danger and terror, Myra saw something different when she looked at the impossible visitor. She sat on a bench near the far wall of the lobby, her legs pulled up under her and her dark eyes fixed on the swirling, shifting form. She did not look afraid, and she did not look confused. She looked curious, and she looked thoughtful, and most strangely of all, she looked sad. Because Mira noticed something that all the experts and all the diplomats and all the brilliant scientists had missed in their panic and their desperation. The colors that rippled across the being were not random. They changed in response to what was happening around it, growing darker when people screamed and lighter when they were quiet. The shapes it made were not meaningless. They repeated in patterns, like questions being asked over and over again to people who could not hear them. This being was not attacking, Myra realized. It was trying to talk. It was trying so hard to be understood, and no one was listening. Something in her heart ached at this thought, because she knew what it felt like to be ignored, to feel invisible, to speak and have no one hear. She was human in a galaxy full of ancient and powerful species, a member of a race that had only been traveling among the stars for 2 short centuries. She knew what it meant to be small and strange and out of place. And so, while the experts argued and the diplomats panicked, and Manager Valrix desperately tried to hold his station together, young Mira Chen stood up from her bench and began to walk toward the impossible visitor that everyone else was running from. Her father saw her moving and shouted for her to stop, but she did not stop. Security officers tried to grab her, but she slipped past them with the ease of someone who knew every corridor and every shortcut in this station. And the being, the impossible shifting thing that had crashed every translator and frightened every guest, went completely still as she approached. For the first time since its arrival, it stopped moving, and it waited. The night stretched on forever, or at least it felt that way to Myra. She sat in the center of the lobby with wandering silence hovering before her, and around them a circle of scientists and diplomats watched in tense silence. Her father stood at the edge of the crowd with worry written across his face, but he did not try to stop her. He had seen the determination in his daughter's eyes, and he knew that nothing in the universe could turn her away from this task. Wandering silence poured knowledge into Myra's mind like water into a cup, and she struggled desperately to hold it all without overflowing. The concepts were so strange and so different from anything she had ever known that her brain felt like it was stretching to make room for them. The rift, she learned, was not simply a hole in space. It was a wound in the very fabric of existence, a place where the rules of reality had been torn apart. In the dimension where wandering silence came from, existence worked differently. And when the 2 dimensions touched, they created a kind of bleeding between worlds. Energy from one side spilled into the other, and this energy was not compatible with the matter in this universe. Wherever it touched, things simply stopped existing. Atoms fell apart, light bent in impossible directions, and time itself became tangled and confused. The rift was currently small, only a few thousand kilometers across, but it was growing. Within 3 cycles of this galaxy's standard time, it would be large enough to consume the entire Nexus Prime system, including the Celestine way station and everyone aboard it. Myra felt fear gripping her heart, but she pushed it aside and focused on the next part of the lesson. Closing the rift required actions on both sides of the dimensional barrier. Wandering Silence's people had already begun their work on the other side, but someone on this side needed to match their efforts. The problem was that the process involved manipulating forces that beings in this universe had never even imagined, let alone learned to control. Wandering Silence showed Myra images of energy patterns and dimensional frequencies and reality anchors, concepts that had no names in any language she knew. She saw them not as words or numbers, but as feelings and colors and shapes, and she tried desperately to find ways to translate them into something the scientists could understand. Her head was pounding, and her eyes were burning with exhaustion, but she did not stop. She could not stop. Too many lives depended on her success. As the hours passed, Myra began to develop a system. She would receive an idea from Wandering Silence, turn it over in her mind until she found some connection to things she already knew, and then explain it to the scientists in the simplest terms she could manage. It was like building a bridge between two mountains, one stone at a time. The dimensional frequency, she explained to the gathered scientists, is like a song that reality sings. In our universe, the song goes one way, but in their universe, it goes another way. Where the two songs meet, they create a kind of noise that tears things apart. We need to add a third song that brings the other two into harmony. The scientists looked at each other with confusion and doubt on their faces. That is not how dimensional physics works, said the lead physicist, a Zelkari with silver scales and 3 brains dedicated entirely to mathematics. Frequency harmonization is a concept that applies to energy waves, not to the fundamental structure of space-time. Mira shook her head and tried again. I know it sounds strange, she said, but I am telling you what I understand. Maybe your words for these things are different, but the idea is the same. We need to create something that matches the pattern of the rift, and then change it gradually until the rift changes too. She drew diagrams on a display screen, shapes that Wandering Silence had shown her, and the physicists gathered around to study them. Slowly, their expressions began to change from doubt to interest to excitement. This is not harmonization, one of them said with wonder in her voice. This is sympathetic resonance applied to dimensional membranes. It is theoretically possible, but no one has ever attempted it because we did not think anyone could survive the process. Myra felt a chill run down her spine at those words, but she did not have time to ask what they meant. There was still so much more to translate, and the clock was ticking. By the time the station's artificial sun began to brighten toward morning, Myra had managed to convey the basic outline of what needed to be done. The scientists were already rushing to their laboratories to begin building the equipment they would need, and the diplomats were sending urgent messages to the Galactic Council to request emergency resources. But Myra noticed that Wandering Silence was growing dimmer, its colors fading and its movements becoming slower. What is wrong? She asked with worried gestures. Are you hurt? Is something happening to you? The being's response came slowly, each shape and color taking longer to form than before. Wandering Silence was dying. Beings from its dimension could not survive long in this universe without connection to others of their kind. The rift had provided a thin thread of contact, but even that was not enough. Every moment that passed drained more of its life force, and soon there would be nothing left. Myra felt tears streaming down her face as she understood what this meant. Wandering Silence had known from the beginning that coming here was a death sentence. It had come anyway because saving this universe was more important than its own survival. You are so brave, Myra said with her hands and her heart. You are the bravest being I have ever known. I will not let your sacrifice be wasted. I promise you that we will close the rift and save everyone. Wandering Silence glowed a little brighter at her words, and Myra felt a wave of warmth and gratitude wash over her. But there was something else in that communication, something the being had not wanted to tell her until now. Closing the rift would require more than machines and calculations. It would require someone to enter the threshold between dimensions and anchor the seal from within. And that someone would need to be a being whose mind was flexible enough to exist in both realities at once, even if only for a moment. A being like Myra. She understood now why the scientists had said no one could survive the process. Most beings had minds that were too rigid, too fixed in their understanding of reality. When they tried to exist in the space between dimensions, their minds simply broke apart. But humans were different. Humans had messy, chaotic minds that could bend without breaking. Humans could hold contradictory ideas and impossible concepts without falling apart. Humans could imagine things that did not exist and believe in things they could not see. These traits had always made humans seem primitive and irrational to the older species of the galaxy. But now, Mira realized they might be exactly what was needed to save everyone. She looked at Wandering Silence, and then she looked at her father standing in the crowd with love and fear in his eyes. And then she looked at all the beings who were counting on her to help them survive. There was only one choice she could make. "I will do it," she said out loud, her voice steady and clear. "I will enter the threshold and anchor the seal. Just tell me what I need to do." Her father pushed through the crowd and grabbed her shoulders, his face pale with terror. "No," he said, his voice breaking. "Myra, you cannot do this. There has to be another way. I will not lose you." Myra reached up and touched her father's face with gentle hands. "There is no other way," she said softly. "I am the only one who can do this. And I am not afraid, Papa. I was born for this moment. I know it in my heart." Wandering Silence wrapped around both of them like a blanket of light, and for one perfect moment, Mira felt the connection that the being missed so desperately. She felt what it was like to be truly understood, to share your soul with another being without any barriers between you. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was going to save them all. The Galactic Council Chamber was the largest enclosed space Myra had ever seen. It stretched for kilometers in every direction, a vast dome filled with floating platforms and holographic displays and representatives from over 10,000 different species. Some were tiny creatures no bigger than her thumb, while others were vast beings that required entire sections of the chamber just to contain their massive forms. Mira stood on a small platform in the center of it all, feeling very small and very young and very human. Beside her floated Wandering Silence, dimmer now but still present, still fighting to hold on to existence long enough to see this crisis through. The Supreme Chancellor, a being called the Axiom that appeared to be made entirely of living crystal, looked down at Mira from its elevated platform with eyes that were older than most stars. "You are the human who claims to speak for the dimensional visitor," the Axiom said, its voice ringing through the chamber like bells. "You are the one who says you can close the rift that threatens to destroy an entire sector of our galaxy. Explain to us how this is possible." Mira took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. She had practiced this explanation 100 times on the journey here, and she knew that the fate of millions depended on her ability to make these ancient beings understand. "The rift is like a wound," she began, "and wounds can heal if they are given the right treatment. Wandering Silence has shown me what needs to be done. We need to build devices that will create a matching resonance on our side of the barrier while their people do the same on their side. When both sides work together, the rift will seal itself naturally." The chamber erupted in noise as thousands of species began talking at once. Some were skeptical, some were curious, and some were openly dismissive of this young human who dared to stand before the most powerful body in the galaxy. The Axiom raised one crystalline limb and silence fell immediately. "Our scientists have examined the data you provided," the Axiom said, "and they confirm that your plan is theoretically sound. But there is one element that concerns us greatly. You say that someone must enter the threshold between dimensions to anchor the seal. You say that this someone must be you. Explain why." Mira glanced at Wandering Silence, gathering strength from the being's gentle glow. "Most minds are too rigid to survive in the space between dimensions," she said. "They cannot hold two different realities at once. But human minds are different. We are chaotic and messy, and we think in ways that do not always make logical sense. We can believe in impossible things and imagine things that do not exist. This flexibility is what allows us to exist in the threshold without breaking apart." A murmur ran through the chamber, and Mira saw many alien faces showing expressions that she had learned to recognize as surprise and disbelief. A representative of the Morvathi, one of the oldest and most respected species in the galaxy, rose from its platform to speak. "What you describe," the Morvathi said, "are traits that we have long considered to be signs of an undeveloped species. Emotional thinking, irrational beliefs, imaginative chaos. These are things that most advanced civilizations have evolved beyond. Are you saying that these primitive traits are actually valuable?" Myra felt a spark of something that might have been anger or might have been pride. "I'm saying that they saved your lives," she said, her voice stronger now. "When your translators failed and your telepaths were overwhelmed and your mathematicians could not find a pattern, I was able to communicate with wandering silence because I did not try to force them into my way of thinking. I let myself feel what they felt and imagine what they imagined. I was flexible where you were rigid, and that flexibility is why we are all here talking instead of waiting to die." The chamber went absolutely silent. The axiom leaned forward, its crystalline form catching the light in 1,000 different colors. "In all my years as Supreme Chancellor," the axiom said slowly, "I have never heard a being speak to this council with such boldness. And I have never seen a being accomplish what you accomplished in that hotel lobby. Perhaps there is wisdom in what you say. Perhaps we have lost something in our pursuit of pure logic and efficiency." The ancient being paused, and when it spoke again, its voice was softer than before. "Billions of years ago," the axiom continued, "my species was not so different from yours. We felt deeply and imagined wildly, and believed in things we could not prove. But over time, we came to see these traits as weaknesses, and we worked to remove them from ourselves. We became pure thought, pure reason, pure crystal, and we believed that this was evolution, that this was progress." The axiom's form flickered with colors that Mira somehow understood to be sadness. "But now I wonder if we were wrong," the axiom said. "Perhaps what we called weakness was actually strength. Perhaps what we discarded as primitive was actually precious. You humans have been among the stars for only 2 centuries, and yet you can do things that we cannot. You can feel what others feel and imagine what others imagine. You can build bridges between minds that have nothing in common." Mira felt tears pricking at her eyes as she listened to this ancient being reflect on millions of years of history. The axiom straightened and addressed the entire council. "I propose that we grant Mira Chen the title of Bridge Builder," the axiom announced. "This is a Tier 1 diplomatic rank, the highest honor our council can bestow. It has never been given to a human before, but I believe she has earned it. She has shown us that the young and the chaotic and the emotional have a place in our galaxy. She has reminded us of what we have lost." The vote was not unanimous. Some species still could not believe that a human child deserved such an honor. But the majority agreed with the axiom, and when the count was finished, Mira Chen had become the first human in history to hold a Tier 1 position in the Galactic Council. She did not feel triumphant. She felt the weight of responsibility settling onto her shoulders like a heavy coat. "Thank you for this honor," she said to the assembled council, "but I cannot celebrate yet. There is still work to be done. The rift is still growing, and we have only 2 cycles left before it becomes too large to close. I need your help to build the resonance devices and coordinate the effort. Can I count on you?" The chamber erupted in sounds of agreement, and for the first time since this crisis began, Myra felt real hope that they might actually succeed. Over the next several hours, she worked with scientists from dozens of species to refine the plans for the resonance devices. She used her new authority as bridge builder to cut through bureaucratic delays and get resources moving. She translated between wandering silence and the engineers who were building the equipment, making sure that every detail was correct. Her father stayed by her side through all of it, bringing her food when she forgot to eat and water when she forgot to drink. He did not try to talk her out of her decision anymore, but she could see the fear in his eyes every time he looked at her. When the devices were finally ready and the fleet was assembled to travel to the rift, Mira took a moment to stand alone with her father in a quiet corridor of the council station. "I am so proud of you," her father said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother would be so proud of you. But I'm also terrified. I cannot lose you, Myra. You are all I have left." Myra hugged him tightly, pressing her face against his chest the way she had done when she was a little girl. "I am not planning to die, Papa," she said. "I am planning to save everyone and come home to you. But even if something goes wrong, I need you to know that I chose this. I chose to be brave instead of safe. I chose to help instead of hide. And I am not sorry." Her father held her for a long moment, and when he finally let go, there were tears on his face, but also a small, sad smile. "You are so much like your mother," he said. "She would have done the same thing. She would have walked into the fire to save people she had never met. It is the best and most terrifying thing about being a Chun." Mira laughed through her own tears and kissed her father on the cheek. "Wish me luck, Papa," she said. He shook his head. "I will wish you more than luck," he said. "I will wish you love and courage and the strength to do what needs to be done. Now go save the galaxy, my brave girl." And so Myra walked away from her father, toward the ship that would carry her to the rift, toward the threshold between worlds, toward a destiny that no human had ever faced before. She was afraid, but she was also ready. The rift was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Mira stood on the observation deck of the flagship and stared at the wound in reality that hung in space before them. It looked like a tear in a piece of fabric, except the fabric was the universe itself. Through the tear, she could see colors and shapes that made her eyes water and her mind spin. The fleet had arranged itself in a careful pattern around the rift, with each ship carrying one of the resonance devices they had built. On Myra's signal, they would all activate at once, creating a harmonic field that would match the frequency of the dimensional barrier. But that would only be the beginning. The field would create a path into the threshold, a thin ribbon of stable space between the two dimensions. And someone would have to walk that path to anchor the seal at its center. That someone was Mira. Wandering silence floated beside her, so dim now that it was almost invisible. The being had held on far longer than anyone had expected, sustained by sheer will and the desperate need to see this mission succeed. "You do not have to do this," one of the admirals said to Mira. "We could send a probe, or perhaps find another human volunteer. You have already done more than anyone could ask." Myra shook her head firmly. "Wandering silence has been teaching me for days," she said. "I understand the patterns better than anyone else. And there is no time to train another person. It has to be me, and it has to be now." The Admiral bowed his head in respect and stepped back. Myra turned to Wandering Silence and raised her hands to speak in their shared language. "Are you ready?" she asked. "Your people on the other side, they know what to do." The being pulsed weakly with confirmation. Yes, they were ready. They had been ready for days, waiting for this universe to catch up. Mira took a deep breath and activated the communication system that linked her to all the ships in the fleet. "This is Bridge Builder Chun," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her heart. "All ships, activate resonance devices on my mark. Remember, the timing has to be perfect. If we are off by even a fraction of a second, the whole thing falls apart." She watched the status displays as each ship reported ready, and when the last light turned green, she closed her eyes for just a moment. She thought about her father, waiting back on the council station with his hands clasped and his heart full of prayers. She thought about her mother, who had died when Myra was young but whose love she still carried with her every day. She thought about Wandering Silence, this impossible being who had become her friend and her teacher and her guide into the unknown. She thought about all the millions of lives she was about to save. People and creatures of every shape and size who would never know her name, but who would live because she was brave enough to walk into the fire. "Mark," she said. The resonance devices hummed to life and the universe sang. Myra felt the harmony wash over her like a wave, and she saw the path open before her. A ribbon of stable space stretching from the ship into the heart of the threshold. It was narrow, and it was fragile, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Wandering silence wrapped around her like armor made of light, and together they stepped forward into the impossible. The moment she crossed the boundary between normal space and the threshold, everything changed. She was not just Mira anymore. She was a point of consciousness floating in an ocean of pure possibility. She could see both dimensions at once, her own universe with its stars and planets and familiar laws of physics, and the other universe with its singing colors and connected minds and rules that were nothing like anything she knew. It was overwhelming, and for a terrible moment she felt herself beginning to fragment, her sense of self scattering into the infinite chaos around her. But then she remembered her grandmother's song, the simple melody that had first allowed her to connect with wandering silence. She began to hum it in her mind, using it as an anchor to hold herself together. The melody became her identity, her reminder of who she was and where she came from. She was Myra Chun, daughter of Samuel and Lynn, granddaughter of May, who had sung her to sleep on summer nights. She was human, and humans were stubborn and chaotic and absolutely refused to let go of the things that mattered to them. She opened her mind and felt for the matching effort coming from the other side of the rift. There they were, wandering silence's people, thousands of connected minds working in perfect harmony to close the wound. Mira reached out with everything she had, pouring her will and her love and her desperate hope into the act of connection. She became the anchor point, the place where both efforts could meet and merge and work together. The seal began to form around her, a shell of healed reality that spread outward like ice forming on a pond. She could feel it growing, feel the wound closing, feel the bleeding between worlds slowing to a trickle and then stopping altogether. But something was wrong. The threshold was collapsing too fast, closing in on her before she could find her way back to her own universe. She tried to move toward the path she had walked in on, but it was already gone, swallowed by the healing reality. She was going to be trapped here forever, suspended between dimensions for eternity. Wandering silence surged around her, and Mira felt the being's fading strength pour into her like sunlight. The visitor was giving up the last of its life force to save her. "No," Myra screamed in her mind. "I will not let you die for me. There has to be another way." But there was no other way, and wandering silence knew it. The being's final gift was more than just energy. It was a permanent thread of connection, a tiny pathway between the two dimensions that would be anchored in Myra's consciousness forever. Through this thread, she could always reach the other universe, always communicate with wandering silence's people, always serve as a bridge between two realities that had never been meant to touch. And through this thread, wandering silence pushed her toward home. Mira tumbled out of the threshold and crashed onto the deck of the flagship, her body whole and her mind intact and her heart breaking with grief for the friend she had lost. Around her, she could hear cheering. The rift was closed, the sector was saved. Millions of lives had been preserved because of what she had done. But all she could think about was wandering silence, the brave and lonely being who had crossed between worlds knowing it would die, who had given everything to save people it had never met and could barely understand. She lay on the deck and cried, and no one tried to stop her. They simply surrounded her with warmth and gratitude and the deep respect of beings who knew they had witnessed something miraculous. When she finally stopped crying and sat up, she found her father kneeling beside her. He had arrived on a shuttle the moment the rift closed, unable to wait a second longer to hold his daughter again. "You did it," he whispered, his arms wrapped tight around her. "You saved everyone. Your mother would be so proud." Mira nodded against his chest, too exhausted to speak. But then she felt something strange, a gentle warmth in the back of her mind, and she realized that wandering silence was not entirely gone. The thread of connection that the being had given her was still there, and through it, she could feel the faintest echo of her friend's consciousness. Wandering silence had returned to its people, reborn in the embrace of the connected minds that had missed it so desperately. It was not dead, not really. It was simply home. And through Mira, it could still touch this universe, still communicate with the beings who lived here, still serve as a bridge between two realities. She smiled through her tears and sent a pulse of love and gratitude through the thread, and she felt an answering pulse return. "You are welcome," she whispered to the universe. "I will always be here. I will always listen. I will always be your bridge." In the years that followed, Mira Chung became the most important diplomat in galactic history. She negotiated treaties that no one else could imagine, resolved conflicts that no one else could understand, and opened pathways of communication between species that had been enemies for millennia. But more than that, she showed the galaxy that the traits they had dismissed as primitive were actually the most valuable gifts of all. She taught them that empathy was strength, that creativity was power, and that the ability to feel what others felt was more important than all the technology in the universe. And whenever she felt lost or alone or overwhelmed by the weight of her responsibilities, she would close her eyes and reach through the thread to touch the minds on the other side. And she would remember that she was never truly alone, because she had built a bridge between worlds, and bridges carry traffic in both directions. She was human, and that was exactly what the galaxy needed.